All right, well, good morning. I, Chair Shelley Bailey, call the Prescription Drug Affordability Board meeting of January 15th, 2025 to order at approximately 9 a.m. Pacific. Melissa, if you could please call the roll.
Chair Shelley Bailey.
Present.
Vice Chair Amy Burns. Vice Chair Amy Burns.
Here.
Dan Hartung.
Here.
Lori Hoagland.
Present.
Robert Judge is excused. Chris Lehman.
Here.
John Murray.
Here.
Dan Kennedy.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Melissa. I would now like to ask if any board members have any declarations of potential or actual conflict of interest that they want to provide to the board this morning. Mr. Murray, I see your hand is raised, so you have the floor.
Thank you. Under advisement from the Oregon Government Ethics Commission, I declare a potential conflict of interest due to my ownership of Murray Drugs Incorporated, comprised of 3 independent pharmacies in Eastern Oregon that have pharmacy services contracts with PBM's insurance companies in the state of Oregon. Using the language of the Ethics Commission, because the PDAB is an advisory board that simply provides information to others who have rulemaking authority, guidance from OJEC is that it appears that at most, you would have a potential conflict of interest each time the PDAB meets to discuss a specific prescription, drug, or related matters. Thank you, Chair Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. All right, well, I do not see any other hands raised, so I would like to move forward to see if any members of my colleagues have any changes to the draft minutes from the December 18th, 2024 meeting that you would like to put forth. And if there are no changes to the draft minutes from December 18th, I would like to ask for a motion related to approving the minutes. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
Chair Bailey, this is Board Member Kennedy. I move for approval of the minutes.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Do we have a second to approve the minutes?
This is Hoagland. I second it.
Thank you, Ms. Hoagland. Melissa, if you could please call the roll.
Dan Hartung.
Aye.
Lori Hoagland.
Aye.
Dan Kennedy.
Yes.
Chris Lehman.
Yes.
John Murray.
Yes.
Vice Chair Amy Burns.
Aye.
Chair Shelley Bailey.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Melissa. I would now like to call on Executive Director Ralph Magrish to provide us with a program update. Ralph, you have the floor.
Thanks, Chair Bailey, and good morning, everyone. Happy New Year to you. Just a few brief announcements. As we move into our board policy review and updates later in the agenda, I do want to share that staff will be putting out a survey instrument to members to help identify ways that we can help improve supporting you in this work. The governor has made it clear that customer service is a priority for across all agencies, and you are, in fact, our customers. So we want to make sure that we are serving you to the best of our ability in meeting your needs. As we will discuss during the policy review as well, there's the expectation around this volunteer commitment of being between 10 and 15 hours a month. So to that point in your busy lives, we want to make sure that this is as easy and rewarding of a volunteer experience as possible for you. So we will be asking for your ideas and ways to improve or suggestions via this survey instrument to make that happen. We will be surveying you board members anonymously on your preferences for staff involvement and engagement and how we help you prepare for meetings. We'll be looking forward to identify ways to help you and fulfill your volunteer obligations and how we can improve as staff operationally to support you. So looking forward to doing that. Next, we as staff are going to be developing and issuing a request for information, or RFI for commercially available data sources that may assist us in our work. For those that don't know or aren't familiar with an RFI process, this is a procurement process the state uses to gather general information about potential suppliers or vendors' capabilities, products or services. To no one's surprise, we've heard over the last year, both from board members and through the public comment process, varying levels of frustration over limitations in our ability to access varied data points. So to that end, we're going to see what commercially available products are out there and are interested in making them available for this use case scenario. Staff will share that draft with the board and solicit feedback when it is completed. I would anticipate that that would not be released until springtime. Finally, beginning in February, we will add a brief standing agenda item of legislative updates that will be specific to bills related to the pharmacy supply chain, coverage and reimbursement of prescription drugs, and this update will be provided directly from DCBS policy staff. So brief but report, but back to you, Chair Bailey. Thank you.
Ralph, thank you for the update. This portion of our agenda is for public comments submitted or requested in advance. The board received 6 written comments, which are reviewed by the board and posted on the board's website. Those 6 letters were from Daria McGrew from Pharma, from Rainier Simmons and Jen Laws from CAN, Tiffany Westrick Robinson from Each Coalition, from Tony Colejo Partnership to Improve Patient Care, and from Dr. Harry Gawanter with Let My Doctors Decide Action Network. Now we have received 4 requests to speak today. I will call on those who have submitted a request to speak and ask them to each state the name and organization in which they represent. Each will have 3 minutes to speak, and during this time, I would ask that you please state your name and your organization. The board will not deliberate on issues or requests during this time. So first on the list, we have Eric Lunis from Pharma. Eric, you do have the floor and welcome today. Please keep in mind the 3 minutes.
Good morning. Just confirming you can hear me.
We can hear you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. So good morning and thank you for the opportunity to comment. Again, my name is Eric Lunis for the record here on behalf of Pharma. Please see our submitted letters for additional comments. They're much more detailed than the time allowed this morning to quickly run through some of the higher points. I'd like to begin my public comment by addressing the lack of opportunity to meaningfully comment. As you perform your annual review of board policies this morning, Pharma respectfully asks the board seriously consider the timeline for public comment. The issues before this board, as you know, are complex and do benefit from meaningful stakeholder engagement. The board's practice of posting materials 1 week in advance, but requiring public comment on Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. gives stakeholders only 2 to 3 days to read, evaluate, and respond. And that read, evaluate, and respond is a deeply simplified version of what happens when organizations are trying to read, understand, and meaningfully respond to the complex and many things that the board has put forth in their documents, which are often in excess of 50 to 100 pages. This is not a sufficient amount of time. We ask that the board amend their policies to commit to posting meeting materials at least 2 weeks prior to each meeting. We believe this is a much more reasonable time frame, and the quality and benefit you'll get from expanding public comment, the board will benefit from that as well. The board's extremely short timeline, just to reiterate, does not allow for meaningful participation by the public, stakeholders, and does fail to comply, we believe, with PDAP statute, the APA, and due process. We know you take these things very seriously, and we greatly appreciate your consideration of this point. Want to jump now quickly to the carrier data call template. We've again provided technical feedback on your carrier data call template. We don't believe it makes sense within the reality of the supply chain. Your data call asks plans to report distinct values of price concessions from manufacturers, price concessions from PBMs. In practice, PBMs contract with pharmaceutical manufacturers to negotiate rebates on behalf of PBMs' health plan clients. Manufacturers generally pay rebates directly to PBMs, which then pass them on, in whole or in part, to health plans or employers according to the terms of the client's agreement with the PBM. This likely contributed to the confusion and lack of clarity that arose in the affordability reviews last year. The board members indicated that they had no information on rebates, although some of the affordability reviews did have information titled PBM concessions. We ask that you look at both the carrier data call and the review template to clarify these terms. And lastly, we'd just like to say kudos to the board staff for the inclusion of new methodologies, process documents. It's a step in the right direction.
Thank you
Thank
for
you
your
so
comment.
much.
We appreciate it. Thank you. Next, we have Ms. Tiffany Westrick Robertson from the International Foundation of Autoimmune and Autoinflammatory Arthritis. Ms. Westrick Robertson, you have the floor and welcome.
Chair Bailey, I do not see Tiffany in the meeting and I've reached out to her. So maybe if she joins later, we can,
Okay.
I'll let you know.
I appreciate the time. Thank you. So next on our list, we have Ben Hughes from Healthy HIV. Ben, if you are here, welcome, and you have the floor.
Absolutely. Welcome and hello, members of the Oregon Prescription Drug Affordability Board. My name is Ben Hughes, and I'm speaking here as a representative for Health HIV, an organization that seeks to advance effective prevention, care, support, and health equity in HIV, HCV, LGBTQ health, and harm reduction. While we greatly appreciate the board's work, we wanted to raise again a few points regarding the implementation of upper payment limits, or UPLs, for prescription drugs in Oregon. Let me first list a few of these key points regarding UPLs. Upper payment limits are designed to control costs, but we have to look carefully at how they could potentially disrupt critical systems that are already working to serve vulnerable populations. In the HIV care ecosystem in particular, 340B covered entities, including federally qualified health centers, community-based clinics, and other safety net providers or covered entities, rely on the savings and rebates from the current system to sustain critical services and expand care access. These funds don't just stay within the walls of the clinic or CBO, they flow outward, supporting the broader community through contracts with health departments and service providers. If UPLs are implemented without fully accounting for how this interconnected system works, we risk undermining not just access to medications, but the very services that keep people living with HIV healthy and supported, and risk doing more harm than good. To address these concerns, we are proposing the following recommendations. First, we suggest the development of a rigorous data framework to ensure that decisions on UPLs are supported by complete, accurate, and Oregon-specific data. Second, we suggest pausing and evaluating UPL implementation until federal guidance stabilizes. The board should prioritize reforms with proven efficacy, ensuring that Oregonians are able to continue to access the medications that they need. Overall, any implementation of UPLs must be informed by comprehensive data, robust stakeholder engagement, and careful consideration of the potential impacts on health programs. We thank you again for your attention to this ongoing and critical matter and your crucial and diligent work thus far. Thank you again.
Thank you for your comments. Next, we have Rainier Simmons from the Community Access National Network. Rainier, if you're here, you have 3 minutes and you have the floor. Welcome.
Good morning. I want to confirm you can hear me okay?
You can.
Okay, thank you. I have some problems with computers this morning. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Rainier Simons, and I'm speaking representing CAN, the Community Access National Network. I'd like to address a couple of concerns from the last meeting. Regarding conflict of interest, we were concerned by some of the activity of Mr. Judge. Due to conflict of interest, he recused himself from voting on policy recommendation number 5. However, he was active in the discourse that led up to the votes. We feel he also should have recused himself from voting on policy recommendation number 9 regarding the dispensing fees and reimbursements because that vote was highly related to profits associated with his employer. However, he provided significant input to the discourse concerning the measure and ultimately voted against it. While the law may not forbid commentary towards votes on issues a board member recuses themselves from voting on, doing so is an ethical violation and is not proper management of trust in terms of the public interest. Also, with your ongoing discussions of affordability, we encourage you to keep pharmacy protections as one of your primary concerns. It does not matter how affordable a medication may seem on paper if it is functionally inaccessible to a patient because a pharmacy was forced to close down or providers not available. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you for your comments. We are now going to move forward to our board annual review of and vote on our policies. So the board approved policies to guide its work when it was established in June of 2022. The policies are posted on the PDAB website. Every year, the board reviews the policies for possible amendments. I'd now like to call on Courtney Whitlock to lead us in a discussion of proposed or of review and proposed amendments to the policies, followed by a board vote on each policy. I would also like to highlight that we are going to take a 5-minute break at approximately 10:30 to 10:45 a.m. So you can mark your schedule for that. So Courtney, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Bailey. Appreciate your time this morning on this. I'm just going to get my screen set up to share. And hopefully everyone can see my screen now. So as Chair Bailey mentioned, this is an annual review for our policies, a little behind due to the work from last year, not being able to get everything in under the review of the UPL study and get that deliverable sent, but we are back on track. We can get these done. To start off with policy 1, this is our overarching board policy, governs the majority of the work that the board does. As it's been posted, most of the information is just cleanup of codified and having the codified OIR versus this indicating of the Senate bill. Little tweaks of words and narrative, but overall, the majority of the conversation that I'd like to get down to is to understand the removal of the last sentence under executive session. The sentence states that electronic records for the executive session are securely stored. There's no recording of the executive sessions, and so since there's no recording or any other electronic versions within the executive session, it's not needed in this section for this executive session review. Was there any questions on this before I went forward? All right, seeing none. Under 12, which is the meeting attendance, absence and participation. Again, just some additional clarifying words with added information based off of Governor Kotak's board and commission requirements, which indicates that on average, board members are expected to participate approximately 10 to 15 hours monthly. This includes the board meetings, meetings with staff, and board material reviews. So before going on, is there any questions or clarification for this section? All right, thanks. So going on, next section that had additional updates was for the board iPads, and this is just to create a little more clarity that with your state issued iPads, to please log in at least every 45 days and then change your passwords every 90 days. And then you are receiving either email or text messages for those reminders. So if there's any concerns with that or challenges, please let staff know right away. But before I move on to the next section, any questions, comments from the board? No? Okay. So 16 had some additional language regarding coordinating with other entities, just from what the staff has observed over the last year or so, just creating a little more clarity for this, which is board members are not obligated to speak about board business outside of board meetings and may delegate those requests to the staff if needed. Also, board members to disclose at the beginning of each board meeting any meetings or work conducted with entities or individuals related to board activities since the last board meeting. And this can include serving on other boards, committees, or engaging in business matters related to pharmacy supply chain. So is there any questions or comments regarding that added information? Yeah, Chairman.
So Courtney, I appreciate that the items in red and blue, I think, are staff edits or suggestions. I would like to propose to my colleagues today that the final sentence would end at committees. I personally believe that the language engaging in business matters related to the supply chain is far too overreaching and would make it so that many board members would not, either future board members or current ones, may not want to participate. I mean, I can say, stating for myself, my career is involved in the supply chain, and I think a lot of my colleagues on this board were asked to do this work because of their expertise in the supply chain. So I think that language is very overreaching and I would like to ask for it to be removed, but I see that others have their hands raised.
Yeah, I saw John's hand up first.
Yes, thank you. And that was my concern as well. I'm involved in the pharmacy supply chain, and I advocate in various ways privately, not in the name of the PDAB by any means, but I do privately, and I guess I do have the same concerns. Thank you.
Understood. Chris.
Yeah, I mean, same thing, Courtney, right? So much of what we're doing every day is engaging in the pharmacy supply chain. So it would be hard to disclose at the beginning of a board meeting, you know, things that are going on in our everyday jobs. So it's probably, at least for me, a little too much in that sentence.
All right. Thank you. Let me turn on my track changes to make these changes to see if this will work. So is this, would that serve the board members a lot more? Something like that, or is there more language that needs edited or added? Yeah.
I mean, thanks. From my perspective, you know, as long as we have a, you know, a process where we can each kind of say, hey, I was asked to be on this board, I participated, we had a meeting last week or something. And that it's not limiting anyone from participating in any of those types of boards or committees. I'm comfortable with the proposed changes that you have showed before us right now.
Any other comments or feedback? All right, well, thank you for your feedback and information, and glad that those edits will work. Going on to section 17, again, this is clarity about in wording regarding if there's any media or lobbyist requests to please speak with the executive director or the board chair regarding before providing any engagement with media or lobbyists. Going on, again, this is just clarifying this underneath the ORS that governs the board work, and that is the end of policy 1 review. I'd like to take the opportunity for the board to vote on this with the added changes. So Melissa, do you want to, I'll stop sharing if you want to put the vote motion on the screen. And I think we need a motion to start it and then a vote.
Chair Bailey, this is Board Member Kennedy. I would move to approve policy 1 as amended by the board today.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy.
This is John Murray. I will second that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Melissa, can you please call a roll to vote on board policy number 1?
Dan Hartown,
Aye.
Lori Hope,
Aye.
Dan Kennedy,
Aye.
Chris Lehman,
Aye.
John Murray,
Aye.
Vice Chair Amy Burns,
Aye.
Chair Shelley Bailey.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Melissa.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna screen share again. All right, so policy 2 is regarding board delegation. There is not many edits or changes into this. Again, just updating any of the ORS or the rules that govern the work that the board does, and any clarifying words within the policy. Short edits here and there. I don't think that there was anything substantial within this policy that needed to be discussed. Nope, that was it. So if the board doesn't have any questions or concerns about policy 2, we'll need a motion for the approval of it.
This is Board Member Murray. I will move to approve the policy as presented with the changes.
I will second it, Lori Hoagland.
Thank you for the motion and for the second related to policy number 2. Melissa, could you please call roll for voting?
Dan Hartown,
Aye.
Lori Hoagland,
Aye.
Dan Kennedy,
Aye.
Chris Lehman,
Aye.
John Murray,
Aye.
Vice Chair Amy Burns,
Aye.
Chair Shelley Bailey.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Melissa, for facilitating the roll call. Courtney, if you would like to proceed with policy number 3.
Thank you, Chair Bailey. So policy number 3 is about the conflict of interest. So again, not any substantial changes from prior year. Just for clarification of knowing that there's 2 forms of conflict of interest. One is an actual conflict of interest, which means that any action or decision or recommendations by a person acting in the capacity of public officials would be in private benefit to determine if the person or the person's relative or the business with which the person or relative of the person is associated with those benefits, versus the potential, which is a possible cause, but is unless is less of a conflict of interest. And then it outlines a few other clarifying of what a potential conflict of interest would be. And then there was one section. So regarding recusal, again, this is primarily based around financial benefits of recusing if there's a conflict of interest. And then disclosing of any of that, this is the only update, is where any identified disclosure of conflict would be posted on the website through the board meetings, and the board chair may recuse the member from any final decision resulting of the overview of the prescription drug if it's identified. Then scrolling down, I think that was it. Yeah, so this is just this clarifying information was for that one. Any questions or comments regarding the conflict of interest? I guess. Chair Bailey.
Thank you, Courtney. I mean, I think this piece is a part, for us to have some robust discussion over, to the extent board members are willing and able. I do feel, and obviously we all read and listen to the public comment that we receive and things, but it does seem to me that we may want to have a discussion, and I can't say I have proposed language for you, Courtney, right now, but at least to mention that if it seems that if we do have our topics within the agenda that we're working through, and if a board member personally feels that they should abstain because of any conflict that they feel they might have, it does seem to me that one best practice we may want to talk about is at least identifying, if a board member feels that way and intends on abstaining for that reason, that possibly before we advance to each section on our agenda, that board members would reference in advance that they were intending on abstaining. I'm not putting that forth as a formal motion, but I do think that's something we may want to talk about together as a board.
So that's
I know this maybe isn't exactly the spot for it, but it was the only part I could think of mentioning it related to these policies.
And I hear what you're saying. What we could do is take
And
this.
also Ralph has his hand raised. I thought I would mention.
Ralph, do you want to answer this first before I make a suggestion for the?
Sure. I think this is absolutely appropriate time for robust conversation amongst board, and if the board wants to land on kind of takeaway or points for staff to consult with the Department of Justice to make sure that anything that the output was consistent with our statutes in terms of conflict of interest and those by the Ethics Commission, we could, again, strongly encourage you to have that conversation. Staff could take it away, and if we need to do a quick return to this in a future agenda item at subsequent month to come to a vote to finalize, absolutely appropriate and encouraged.
Okay, thank you for that insight. Courtney, I apologize for interrupting you.
Oh, I was just gonna say pretty much the same thing, is that we can have the board discussion now if we would like, or staff can take it back and find supporting language between what DOJ would suggest and any other committee, and then bring it for a vote for next time. So, but I see Chris's hand up. I would like to acknowledge his comment.
No, I was just going to echo what Chair Bailey said, Courtney, that I think it would be helpful if we're having a debate or discussion to know ahead of that discussion if a member of the board is going to abstain from voting because of a conflict of interest, so that we know that while we're having the discussion about the topic, instead of when we get to the moment where we're voting.
Yeah, and John, I see your hand up.
And
Ms.
Chair,
Murray, have your hand raised.
I'm sorry, Chair Bailey, I guess I'm gonna just make the comment that when I first was appointed to the board, I did consult with the Government Ethics Commission on conflict of interest. And that's why I read the statement that I do this at the beginning of each meeting, where I use their own words to describe how they presented it to me. Because we are only an advisory board, we don't make policy decisions. We make suggestions, and the legislature is the one that would approve them. They said at the very most, and even then they hesitated in the rest of their letter, but they said at the very most you would have a potential conflict of interest, which does not preclude discussion or vote on the issues. So just a point of clarification, that's kind of the rule I'm going by and living by. I obviously have contracts with PBMs and everybody that we discuss in these meetings. But OJEC's opinion was that because we're only advisory, now if we were setting upper payment limits and things like that, then there's a whole nother level of conflict of interest that would happen. But since we're not, that's why I read the statement, and that's kind of what I'm going to try to live by to the best of my ability.
Well, and Mr. Murray, thank you for that. I mean, and Courtney, one thing for clarity, I do want to make sure to say is when I referenced that about maybe identifying early on if you're abstaining from a particular section from voting, I want to make sure I was clear. I wasn't necessarily saying you should also abstain from participating, because each of us were requested to be here because of our knowledge on unique pieces of the supply chain. So I just wanted to make sure, like on the record, I referenced, just because in my personal opinion, just because someone may elect to abstain from a vote on a particular piece, I do believe that their input they're still a board member and still part of the important work that we're doing.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So what is the board's, do you want to try to finesse some language now, or would you like staff to go back and talk with DOJ and bring something forward for next month for this policy? Yeah, Chair Bailey.
I do feel like we need to make sure DOJ reviews it before we vote on it, because I just feel like we should have them double check related to all the rules that we're following for our board. That's
Chair Bailey, if we can, before going to John, who I think just put his hand back up, if you could maybe soundbite or distill, or collectively, if individual members could, what that takeaway would be, whether it be, as you said, guidance on whether a person knowingly is going to recuse themselves or voluntarily step away from a policy discussion. Personally, I agree with your perspective that folks have been recruited and appointed to this board for their expertise, so that their meaningful experience and knowledge of the supply chain can contribute to a rich policy discussion. To your point, whether they should vote would be a different declaration or decision point. So just want to make sure we're capturing what the takeaways are for us to work with DOJ on. Thank you.
Now, Mr. Murray, before I answer that, you have your hand raised. You have the floor.
Yeah, I guess my suggestion might be to involve the Oregon Government Ethics Commission to find out if really any conflicts of interest are applicable here. I mean, I understand. I mean, I'm trying to go by what their original letter was from 4 years ago, 3 years ago. And so if something has changed, I need to know that as well. So I guess my request would be, yes, none of us want to cause issues for this board at all. And so if DOJ and the Government Ethics Commission could help us with that, it would be appreciated.
We can certainly seek their consultation, both of them. Chair Bailey, sorry, go ahead.
And to clarify, or I guess follow up on what Mr. Murray said. From my perspective, a board member may abstain from voting for various reasons that are personally related to them, which may or may not be limited to feeling they have a perceived conflict, right? They may just have their own reason why they're abstaining. And so that's where I was thinking we would want to know in advance, at least that someone is abstaining. So Courtney, I do have proposed language. It's rather long, but I know this is being recorded and I could read slowly if you would like.
Let me see where we would put it. So you want it under the disclose a conflict of information?
I think it should be related. I thought we had a piece here related to recusal and voting. Yeah, somewhere here. Recusal.
I can just put it down here.
So I don't have the header I would use is policy on abstaining from voting.
Abstaining?
Yeah, yeah, just the header policy on abstaining from voting.
Well, so this is already the policy, so it'd be another.
Okay, so then I'll just give the language I was thinking. If a board member intends to abstain from voting on any matter or section under consideration, they must declare, I guess, comma, but they must declare their intent to abstain prior to discussion related to the vote. The declaration of abstination should include a brief explanation such as a potential conflict of interest or other relevant reason, comma, to ensure transparency and maintain trust in the decision-making process. So now we can discuss, but that was my.
So yeah, Chair Bailey, I would encourage you go ahead and have that discussion, and wherever you land, we will take that and shop it with DOJ and the Ethics Commission and get back to you. So.
Okay. Does this language look in alignment with what other board members were thinking related to any feedback related to declaration of abstention for a part of something? But Dr. Hartung, you raised your hand. You have the floor.
Yes. I think I like the intent of this bullet here. And I think, given some of the comments we've received about just not merely abstaining, but also before the discussion mention that the person is going to abstain for such and such reasons, I think would let other board members know if they, obviously they can have the discussion, but we then have the full information about, any potential conflicts of interest that they have, which I think helps ensure trust and credibility of our entire decision process. So I like this addition.
Thank you for your comment, Dr. Hartung. Vice Chair Dr. Burns, you have the floor.
Yeah, I don't think that this really leaves much room for if we get to in the conversation, somebody realizes, well, I think I better abstain because you have to know ahead of time. And there might be instances when we don't know. I would not keep the second sentence, or I would maybe adjust it a little bit. Those are my thoughts on that.
Chair Bailey, Vice Chair Burns, if I may, given there will be no vote today, excuse me, Vice Chair Burns, I might actually encourage you to propose alternate language or something else. We are happy to take an A, B, C, and or D version for that matter to DOJ and the Ethics Commission, so we don't need to go back to the well multiple times. And then we could bring each of those back to you for further consideration. So again, rich and appropriate discussion.
And Ms. Hoagland, you had your hand raised. You have the floor.
I guess for purposes of conversation and discussion, my question would be to Chair Bailey, other relevant reason, what are some of the things that you were envisioning when you created this?
Yeah, I think at least personally, the intention was that, yes, some board members may abstain because they feel they have a conflict that maybe they kind of just realized, that section was a conflict for them. So maybe they were always intending to abstain from that part of the discussion because of that. But I do think that we've experienced through our or boards in general, that sometimes people abstain from voting for reasons that are personal. And I do think in looking at some of the rules from other boards and things, that you could get in a position where one person abstains and then another person abstains, and then all of a sudden the meaningful work that everyone's been working so hard on doesn't advance. And so from my perspective, if someone is intending on abstaining, they should reference it at the beginning of the discussion that we're having. Vice Chair Dr. Burns, your hand was raised.
Yeah, just kind of from what Ralph asked, if you just made a couple of tweaks, I think that it would work for me. So if you added something like whenever possible, if a board member intends to abstain from voting, and then in the second sentence, if you changed should to may, then that would work for me.
Dr. Burns, help us with the first thing you said again. I see Courtney captured the second, but want to make sure to help her
whenever
out.
possible.
Okay.
Because like I said, in some instances, that might be something that perhaps they walked into the conversation not intending to have to abstain, but something took a turn in the conversation and then they felt that they should. So this, the way it's written, seems to have like, you have to have the intent beforehand, and then we should leave some opening for people well-meaning that, didn't know ahead of time.
The Chair Bailey and board, if consensus that this works as a conversation starter for staff with DOJ and the Ethics Commission, we will happily take this forward to them and get their feedback and report back to you. So I guess I don't see a formal need for a vote to approve a request for staff because we're not finalizing this policy. So we'll leave it to you all collectively, informally, if this is language that you are comfortable with through collective informal discussion that we take forward for that consultation.
Thank you, Ralph.
All right, we will bring this one back for next month to be reviewed with any additional language from DOJ or the Ethics Commission and go from there. So thank you, board members. Appreciate that. We won't be voting on the form then either since they are together, but just a reminder, board members, that we will need new COI forms from you. So once the policy is approved, the staff will send out the updated conflict of interest form for you to fill out and then submit to us before the next meeting in March. So going on then real quick to policy number 4, which is our public comment policy. Just a couple updates that there's 2 ways to sign up, which is to provide comments is written and or oral. And then Chair Bailey or the chair will ask speakers to give their name and affiliation before they begin speaking. So just clarification on that sentence. The only significant added component of this policy is this last sentence. It says, due to board meetings and time constraints, only 1 person per organization will be added to the list of public comment speakers for each board meeting. So that is the end of that. And then the form for the comment, public comment, was this updated again just for clarification on instructions. And then the form itself has remained the same. So is there any questions or additional comments from the board members before providing a motion? And yeah, Chris, I see your hands up.
Yeah, it's not a question about the policy or the form, Courtney. It's more, is this a good time, Chair Bailey, for us to talk about the consistent comments that we get from pharma and others about the packet getting out and having time? You know, I think we've heard consistently over the last many months about only having, 48 hours or so to get written comments submitted based on the short amount of time that not short, I mean, it's a week, but that we've heard from the public about not having enough time to review the packet before having to make comments.
I do think, Mr. Lemon, this is the time to have that discussion. So go ahead and share any ideas or things that you would like to discuss further related to that.
Well, I guess it would be for you, Ralph, really. I mean, is it possible to, I mean, do you want, go ahead, Ralph.
Sure. So first, and I think, thank you, Courtney. She's got the enabling legislation on screen to share. To affirm to all of you with no uncertainty, this board has met and continues to meet its statutory obligations around timing and posting of documents and deliverables. To that point, as Courtney's got on screen, meeting notice 2 weeks in advance, making materials for each board meeting at least 1 week in advance of the meeting. To that point, I would also note that I think, Courtney, if you just even scroll to the top of the previous page, this enabling legislation, oh, there you go. I think number 10 it is, or 11 there, 11 rather. Legislation in spirit and intent was setting a meeting cadence to meet no fewer than every 6 weeks. In that spirit and intent, if this board was meeting every 6 weeks, that would be a significantly longer runway and opportunity for staff to prepare work. So staff comment in response to that, respectfully to those who have submitted those public comments, is that in a 4-week meeting cadence, that is not a realistic expectation or process to turn around documents as quickly that quickly. With that said, this board has certainly made the commitment that we will post and do things as soon as they are readily available, capable, copied, quality products that are meant for you and the general public. To that extent, there are often internal working processes, as you are well aware, in terms of data validation, data analysis on policy issues or other documents, consultation with the Department of Justice, working through internal communication programs for formatting, report preparation, deliverables. So long-winded way of respectfully saying that while we appreciate the comment, I do not believe it to be administratively practical or realistic.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for that feedback, Ralph.
So, Mr. Lehman, in hearing your concerns, could we want one step in the direction of all working together? Logistically, could we modify the 72 hours to 48 hours related to written comment? I know we have 24 hours, or maybe I'm getting it mixed up, on oral comment. But so I appreciate and hear everything Ralph's saying related to our statute and our timeline, and that we're following everything that we have in statute for our timeline, but would it be logistically feasible for us to have written comments no later than 48 hours before a PDAB meeting so that we could include, you know, anything that gives, I was hearing and listening to the cadence of days and the weekend and things that would extend it through the Monday. Is that something that logistically is feasible?
So Chair Bailey, I would say deference to you and the board on that, and that we can push that out to you at whichever time. It certainly narrows the window of opportunity for you to review and prepare. But to that point, the other side of that is a little more space and grace to those wishing to submit that comment. So deference to the board and your individual and collective preferences there.
Okay, I would like to have that discussion with my colleagues related to the proposal of modifying from 72 to 48. Mr. Lehman, you have the floor.
Yeah, I mean, Chair Bailey, I think if it's logistically possible for the staff to be able to get to that to us, I mean, I'd be willing to make that change and understand that it may be Monday evening or Tuesday morning, even sometimes when we get the actual final written comments, but it would address a concern. It would show we're listening to the feedback from the, stakeholders in the group, so.
And I guess to lean into that, Mr. Lehman, I believe we'd probably still receive, the packet of information exactly on the cadence that is identified in statute. But if there was an additional written comment or something, it would be posted on our website. And we typically do receive emails from staff when public comment comes. Actually, that's something I guess I would just like to share related to visibility of the process is we do receive information related to written comments as they come in, and that is helpful as board members. So I think logistically, Mr. Lehman, my thought process would be the packet would still come out, but if there was additional written comment by that Monday night, that we would get that as a separate communication or posted on the website.
All right, so I went ahead and made the change to 48 hours for that policy. Hopefully that will give the public a little more time to meet that requirement, and then we'll update the rest of the language within the agenda and online and stuff as well once the board approves the policy. Any other comments or feedback from board members? All right, well, thank you so much for your time on reviewing the policies and getting these shored up for our upcoming review.
Do we need to vote to approve that one?
Yeah,
Courtney?
I need a motion and the votes, and then we'll get on to the next agenda item. Yes, Chris.
Yeah, I'm happy to make a motion to approve the policy as amended today.
And I'll second the motion. This is John Murray.
Wonderful. Melissa, please call the roll.
Dan Hartung,
Yes.
Lori Hoagland,
Yes.
Dan Kennedy,
Yes.
Chris Lehman,
Yes.
John Murray,
Yes.
Vice Chair Amy Burns,
Aye.
Chair Shelley Bailey.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Melissa, for facilitating the vote. Courtney, let's see if, I believe you have the floor. Okay, so I guess this section of our meeting is now for a board review of the data sets and OAR 925-200-0010 criteria for upcoming affordability reviews. One of the purposes of PDAB is to conduct affordability reviews on prescription drugs and insulin products. Today, the board will review the initial preliminary list of prescription drugs and insulin for affordability reviews, which will begin in the upcoming months. The lists are posted on the PDAB website, and links are included in today's agenda materials. I now call on Courtney Whitlock to lead us in this discussion. Courtney, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Bailey, but I think you're gonna have to back up a little because we need to review the carrier.
The carrier, so you're telling me I read the wrong section, so scratch that. Let's move forward, and let's now have a discussion of the board review of carrier data call template. The board will begin the affordability review process in upcoming months to prepare the Department of Consumer and Business Services will send out forms to insurance companies requesting information about specific prescription drugs. And once the board identifies the subset list. Today, the board will review the template. A copy of the draft template is included in today's agenda materials and is also posted on the PDAB website. So Courtney, could you please lead us in a discussion of the board review of carrier data call template? Courtney, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Chair Bailey. Appreciate the time. Max, gonna ask Heather Doyle and Paige Yu to also be on camera. They're gonna talk through this. I'm probably gonna hand it over to Heather as she set up the data call. Just to reiterate, the importance of this template is that once the board has gone through selecting the subset list off of the preliminary list, those drugs and insulin products will go back to the health insurance carriers for the additional information on each drug that was selected on the subset list. So I'm going to hand it over to Heather to share her screen and have a conversation with the board members about what this project is about.
Thank you, Courtney. Give me just 1 second. Okay, can you see my screen? Okay, thank you. So
Heather, can you blow it up just a little bit?
Sure.
And in the corner, thanks.
Is that helpful?
Yeah, that's a little bit better, thanks.
Okay, thank you. So I will walk through the format of this template. As Courtney mentioned, there are some copies of this in the agenda. This is from the Excel workbook that we have. This first tab that we are looking at is the introduction and the instructions for the carriers for completing the template. As we go through it, when you look at the different tabs, you'll see that there are fields highlighted in yellow, indicating that those are required fields for the carriers to fill in. Some of those are conditional based on the response that is input into that particular row of data. Next, you'll see links that will take the carrier through various parts of the spreadsheet, from the company information that they fill out into other sections of this instruction sheet. So that first one where we would anticipate or expect them to answer would be the company information, where they will, I will walk you through that. They'll have all of these fields available to them with the expectation that they will fill them out. And they, at the same time, can also navigate back to the beginning of the instructions or to that sheet directly as they see fit. We crow down to the data limitations and notes. This is an optional fill-in based on the individual carriers and what they might have to say about their data in particular. And this will be an area where they can input that. Each one of these bolded sections for each section or worksheet indicates a field that has a place for input of data. Next is the claims and cost sheet. Again, navigation is included at the top, and any particular notes pertaining to these sections are included here. And again, in bold are all of the fields that are expected to be completed by the carriers. When we scroll down further, we jump to plan design. We do have an accompanying information sheet, which is called the plan types information, which I will get to as I go through the rest of the workbook. And we will see here the expectation that we have for the different fields here, including prescription drug name and therapy class, plan type, formulary status, and so on and so forth. Each one, you'll see there's a green text after each field, and that's just indicating the format of that particular field. Further down, we get to the price concessions tab. Again, following the same format, bolded names indicate fields requiring attention from the carrier, or also, as in this one, the total number of claims for this particular sheet when no action is required, just so it's clear for the carriers as they fill this in. When we come down to the bottom of the instructions, they can return back up to the top, or they can navigate away into one of the tabs that you see here. Next, we go into the definitions tab, and this is basically things that might come up as a question as they fill in this sheet. Facts and questions, we just have this one at the moment. If we encounter any others, we can definitively add those there. Going into the data entry screens, do any of the board members have any questions at this point? Okay, continuing on. This will be the first place where we would expect data entry. Here are the yellow fields that you saw before that indicate a required field. Also indicates over here that these particular ones are required. Down here, there are selection fields for them to choose their market type. Once that has been completed, they would move on to, if needed, this optional tab of data limitations and notes. Every data point that is potentially fillable is an option here in the drop-down list that they can choose from any of those or all. Same thing with other sections or worksheets that are included. They may choose all other or in specific place of interest. In here, they can type in whatever that concern or limitation is. Moving on to the first data entry, there is some fake data or basically just some example data that is used here. These are not real NDCs representing anything in particular, just so you would get an idea of what we would provide. We would have the drug name, the therapy class, the brand, and the NDC code, and these yellow fields would be expected to be completed. There are specific formats, and this column, for instance, is a calculated column that would create a calculation based on the entries in these required fields. Before I move on to the next tab, are there any questions from any of the board members? Okay, thank you. The next tab that we'll get to is the plan design. Again, we've put in some interesting, well, I call it interesting fake data here, which basically is what they would expect to look at. One thing you'll notice here is this is not inclusive of an NDC. This is at the aggregated drug level. It will choose a plan type. This, I will show you a breakdown of this as I get further into the spreadsheet. They can choose from one of these. Then moving on to the choice of a formulary status, copay status, and you'll see when I was speaking earlier about a required field becoming required based on a selection, this is one where that would happen, where if a fixed fee is chosen, then the fixed fee field then becomes a required field. Indication of step therapy, prior authorization. If prior authorization requirement is selected, then the number of approved and number of denied would also be highlighted. Moving along to the side of the sheet, provider administration is the drug provider administered, and third-party payments being allowed for the drug. If the answer to this is yes, then there's a follow-up question for whether or not this can be applied to the member out-of-pocket cost. Any questions on this sheet in particular, or any of the others? Yes, Chair Bailey.
Ms. Doyle, thank you for going through this and for all your work on this. I do just for transparency and discussion, are these fields that carriers are used to seeing identified in a similar way so that when they do a data extract, these are fields that most carriers readily have this information available? Is that accurate? Oh, Ralph?
I think if I may, I'd like to have Courtney and I tag team on this in fairness to Heather, who was not with
Okay,
us
yeah,
for
no.
for the last cadence of this. This is her first foray into this.
Oh, no problem.
Not
Sorry.
at all. And appreciate, and Courtney, pick me up on this if I miss anything, please. But to that point, last year's data template, we did shop and socialize with our state licensed carriers through the Department of Consumer and Business Services insurance carrier calls and monthly calls and check-ins, and had some feedback and process conversations with them. To that point, I don't think there's been any notable changes in data points collected, so it's something they will be familiar with. To that point, I will offer a public kudos to Heather and kind of the process improvements that she's made in the template itself to secure it from accepting bad data, if you will, or anomalies, or it will reject certain things that had been formatted incorrectly previously that candidly did create some additional administrative work for both us and the plans. I think she's brought a real process improvement there, but materially, this should be things they are familiar with. Courtney, did I miss anything there?
No, yeah, this is still the same material for collection from last time. It's just better formatted.
And thank you. And I believe that to be the case, but I wanted to make sure we had that discussion during our meeting here today, just for visibility and transparency. So Ms. Doyle, we really appreciate your work. So sorry to interrupt you during your presentation.
Uh-oh, Heather, I think we lost your audio. So
Hmm.
there you go. Now we can hear you. Try again.
Okay. I have no idea what happened, technology. So thank you for the question, Chair Bailey. Are there any other questions regarding this piece of the template before I move on? Again, if you'd like to see any of the drop downs that are contained within that, I am happy to click on those so you can see them. Moving on then to price concessions, which is the final data entry tab for the carriers. Again, this is at the aggregated drug level. We will provide the drugs that are in the list. And one thing to note too on these sheets, that if there is something that the carrier has that they do not see here, they will have the option to add further information below the provided information to allow for anything that they need to add. Also, they will choose, you'll see again, these required fields. This total number of claims might find interesting as not being a required field. That is because this is a formula-driven field to pull that number directly from the claims and cost as it is entered to eliminate errors in that type of manual entry. So although it is required for us to collect, it will be collected by means of data validation. Also, you'll see here we have the total cost before, and then you have 4 columns indicating various types of price concessions. This last column, again, is a calculated column based on the input for the others, and the price concessions percentage is also a calculated field. Let me see. And related to the plan design is the last tab, but again, I'd like to pause for any questions. I know this is a large spreadsheet, so if there are any questions, please don't hesitate. The last is, if I go back briefly to this plan design tab, well, you will see this field here where the carrier is expected to enter the plan type for this drug. That breakdown can be found here. And this basically is on the drop-down list, all of the options that are available to the carrier, and a code here for what the C, the M, and the MCD stands for. So at any point, either from the instructional page or from the plan design page, when they're looking at this, they can navigate over to this page to clarify any points that are unclear as they complete that section. Going back to this plan design tab, again, noticing that in this example data that you're seeing 8 drugs, and our list may have, we'll probably have more than that. They will have the option to add more rows at the bottom to facilitate or accommodate rather any other plan types that are related to that drug. So it is not exclusive of any additions they need to make. And I think with that, that wraps up the bulk of the spreadsheet that is meant to be the data call template. And again, I'd like to open that up for any questions that anyone has regarding what you've seen, or if there's anything that you would like to review again before we move on to the next items. Okay.
Yep, hearing none. I will thank you, Heather. I really appreciate all your time and effort and just cleaning that up from our last review. But Chair Bailey, back to you for the next agenda item, which I believe is actually a break, and then we jump into the.
Thanks for the reminder. So I would like to announce that we will be taking a break right now at 10:07 a.m. Pacific. This is a 5-minute break. We look forward to seeing you back here in 5 minutes. All right, I believe our 5-minute break has ended. Melissa, can you just help me confirm that we have board members here for quorum? Maybe a brief roll call.
Yes. Chair Shelley Bailey.
Present.
Vice Chair Amy Burns.
Here.
Dan Hartung.
Here.
Lori Hoagland.
Here.
Robert Judge is excused. Chris Lehman.
Here. John
Murray.
Here.
Dan Kennedy.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Perfect. Thank you, Melissa. So here at 10:13 a.m. Pacific, we will continue our board work. Next on to the board review of data sets and OAR 925-200-0010 criteria for upcoming affordability reviews. One purpose of the PDAB is to conduct affordability reviews on prescription drugs and insulin products. Today, the board will review the initial preliminary lists of prescription drugs and insulin for affordability reviews, which will begin in the upcoming months. The lists are posted on the PDAB website and links are included in today's material packets. I now call on Courtney to help lead us in this discussion. Courtney Wicklock, you have the floor. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Bailey. I'm going to share screen and have a quick overview with the board regarding, so I did this presentation for the board back in September, kind of regarding the overall review structure and process for the affordability concepts. So just as a quick agenda item, we talked about how the board came up with the previous review process and what those decision makings were, how staff has updated the affordability review process going forward, what we'll be starting today, and then kind of the overall goals and purposes of it. So just again, I know everybody's already seen these slides and has already been presented this information, but from the first affordability review, the decision making was to primarily focus on the carrier data. It was much easier to clean and to utilize in the concept for what's going on in the market and out-of-pocket cost for patients. The manufacturer drugs are a little more challenging, the same for this time. They are posted on the website. Welcome any feedback or recommendations from board members if you have the opportunity to really look at those and dive into them, that we may be able to find a way to process through them. But for right now, the manufacturer drugs for the price increase list, which I will give you those specific parameters in a few minutes, we discuss about the process. And then the new specialty list is very challenging to create any meaningful data points off of. The specialty list is really challenging because it's a projection of information based off of an assumption of the impact that the drug has on the system or out-of-pocket cost. So there's some challenges within the, that OER requirement. But for the first review, the preliminary list was set up looking at the most costly, greatest increase, most expensive, and most prescribed drugs. Board decided to focus primarily on most costly drugs as key data identifiers. Any drug that only came in as most prescribed was removed off the list. It wasn't determined to be a significant data point for the board. And then focus on the top drugs. If you recall, for the board members who started the first review, we had multiple data lists and we merged them all together to make our preliminary list. Once the preliminary list was set up, we identified the subset list, just like we're doing this time around as well. But under the subset list, CCO top reporting was identified, top costly. Any drug that was identified as most costly was incorporated into the drug list. And then the board decided to pick only 30 drugs, including insulin products, for the board to review. So that was just from the first review. As we got through the process, I know that the board decided to make a pause on that process. And it just had to do because of the initial setup with some of the data. A lot of the drugs, as we started really reviewing the drugs, identified that some of them were misclassified. There wasn't enough information. So unfortunately, then we got to below 9 drugs, which is our statutory requirement due to data limitations, which resulted in the pause of it. The process in itself has been helpful in determining drug affordability in the supply or the healthcare system for Oregon and for patient out-of-pocket costs due to utilizing the top 25 reported drugs. So again, the process that we've developed for this time is kind of breaking things out into steps. So we had the phase 1, which staff just completed, which is again, breaking down all the carrier information, identifying anything within the manufacturer data that was reported, and pulling insulin information from APAC. We're now jumping into phase 2, starting today. So basically what this is this follows our OIR our rule, which is 925-200-0010, which is I often refer to as the Rule 10. And that is the process where the board will use to determine your subset list from the preliminary list. So once the subset lists are identified, then that is when all those drugs will go to the carriers for the data call. And they'll put on the data call template that Heather just showed you and send those off, including the insulin list, which is really meaningful because, again, for clarification for the board members, carrier list is provided, or cost are net a rebate. APAC is gross. So being able to send insulin information with the subset list, we will be able to be provided the information as well. So we have a little more clarity what's going on with some of the insulin drugs. And then once we get once we get the data call back, then we will start reviewing those drugs through the ORS 925-200-0020, also known as the -20 rule. And then the staff will develop the affordability review packets of material for each board member to review and make the decisions to identify the 9 drugs. Phase 5 is basically just the write-up, the report that is due annually at the end of the year, which identifies price trends. I'll include the board's recommendations for any improvements and then any drugs that are were reviewed during this process. So before I dive into a little bit more clarity of each of these phases, questions around the initial setup. All right, seeing none, hearing none. So again, diving down a little more, our statute requires the board to review drugs submitted into the DPT, or the Drug Price Transparency Program, that collects the 25 most frequently prescribed drugs, the 25 most costly drugs, and the 25 most greatest increased drugs. Board, our DPT also collects manufacturer reporting drugs for annual increase of $100 or more, and has a 10% increase. It has to be both of those requirements to report to the DPT that the board reviews. And then manufacturers also report the monthly report for new specialty drugs monthly to them, but this is one of the board recommendations to remove the quarterly requirements, because it only comes in during that year, when it's just easier to pull everything from the same year that it's being reviewed for the rest of the carrier drugs. And then insulin products come from APAC. So we just cleaned up all those, created the preliminary lists. Yes, Chris, I see your hands up.
Courtney, one of the comments that we had in the public written comment called out the fact that there were drugs on the list that we currently have, because we decided we were going to use only that carrier data and the top 25 lists. But I tried to filter it, but I couldn't get to exactly what I think they were calling out. But there's some meds on our current list that weren't in those top 25. Can you address how those got on there?
So every single drug that's on the preliminary list did come from the top 25 list. What happened was during the ranking and the identification during that like blue section in the preliminary list, not every single, because anything below the top pay was at 75. So
yeah, so the top 25 was immediately marked in those blue columns if they were on each of those 3 lists. And other drugs were marked in according to which list had the greatest impact on the drug, if they were reported by 6 or more carriers.
So we'll get to that, Chris. I think once you see the spreadsheet versus like where we're at now, I think once you see the spreadsheet, we'll be able, but every single drug that is on the preliminary list came from the top 25 reported drugs from the carriers.
Okay, thank you.
There's none that were added. And again, I understand that some of this is confusing probably through the reading of the material versus this is why we come to the board meetings and kind of describe our processes with the board members as well. So going forward, and hopefully, Chris, apologies, I just want to take a minute to pause, make sure nobody else had any questions regarding that. Okay, so we're now starting today in some capacity the Rule 10 review. So we've already done the top 2 portions, which is, cleanup and the DPT carrier list and anything came in from the manufacturer. So staff took care of this. Board will be reviewing, and doesn't have to be in this chronological order. The board can decide however they want to drill down the list through, identifying information from WAC or pricing, FDA requirements, that's including your orphan drugs, fast track, anything like that, and biosimilars, biologics. therapeutic alternatives that the board or that the drug may have. One thing that, so this requirement kind of indicates about cost and availability to the drug. That's actually better served, that specific component is Rule 20. So it's what we did this time was just identified if the drug had a therapeutic alternative, and then work with a clinician to identify how many therapeutic alternatives are associated with that drug. Because we know that basically 5 to 6 or more therapeutic alternatives, there's going to be market competition. So the board will be able to drill down, if you so decide, how many to remove drugs with significant therapeutic alternatives to them. And then, of course, the exclusivity information as well. So this is the most important part to really focus on and to really understand is the Rule 10 drill down through the preliminary list. And we're going to jump into that in just a few minutes. I just want to continue the highlight real quick. So insulin will also follow the same requirement, but with a more focus of the overall spend, per patient spend, and patient out-of-pocket cost to create that identification. And Heather will walk through those requirements with you when we get. So that was in phase 2. Again, phase 3, back to the data call, get any additional information from anybody else in the supply chain that we will need to make those packet materials as accurate as possible regarding what's going on with that drug, and then the reporting requirements. So before jumping into the next section, just as a high level, any questions about the phasing? None? Okay, we're going to go into just a reminder, the goal of PDAB, which is to make prescription drugs affordable in Oregon for patients and the healthcare system. And that is applied through the criteria set up under our Senate bill, SB 844. I forgot to add in there's also language under Senate bill 192 or 291. Sorry, Rob.
All good. 192.
192. And then our rules. So, and then everything that's listed in the bullets are already in our statute requirements. So those are just the reminder. The goal of the PDAB is to look at drugs that may cause affordability issues. The purpose of the reviews is to improve the accessibility and affordability of prescription drugs to patients in the healthcare system. And this is done again through the cost analysis, identifying high drugs, informed decision through the board discussions. Anything we can come up with transparent pricing through the manufacturer or requesting information. If we can find anything regarding value-based pricing, and then just ensuring that the drug is accessible and affordable to the patients. And then I think going on, we're almost done. So, and then this just real quick. So what creates an affordability challenge to the healthcare system? We know that's the cost of the drug, lack of therapeutic alternatives. Sometimes it's the number of patients that require the drug, the frequency of the drug, insurance coverage. So these are all concepts to also consider, but they're not specific data points within our statute or within our rule. These are just things that can create the challenges for the system. And then lastly, as we kind of wrap things up, affordability, primarily meaning through board discussions, the ability to pay for medications without experiencing financial challenges. And that's basically associated with the cost of the medication, insurance coverage, discounts and programs, and market competition. And then as we can find it, sometimes the level of financial stability or income for those patients. So before we start into the big review of the data sets, is there any questions from board members about the process, the expectations, the goals of the upcoming review? Yeah, Chair Bailey.
I am Courtney. So back to your previous slide related to what creates affordability challenges. Mm-hmm. This is just more to throw out there as we think about our reviews, both this year and moving forward. I guess there's a lot of these pieces that I think we have access to information on now, and then leaning into what Ralph shared earlier about trying to find additional market sources. But I guess one thing I just want to raise a personal importance to would be health outcomes. All of these obviously are all equally important, but I guess as we're thinking about the reviews and how we get information after the subset list is identified, you know, the health equities, patient population, market dynamics, everything kind of in the right-hand column, I think is where we still have to continue as a team to find sources of data to help support us through this process. So I just wanted to call that out. I know that does nothing for what we're talking about right now in our process, but I did just want to make sure to mention it.
Okay. Yes, Chris, I see your hand up.
The other thing I was going to ask about, Courtney, is just how does access work into this? Because we've had a lot of discussions about, you know, pharmacies in rural areas in the state, the lack of pharmacies in the state. And so the ability to access medications through pharmacies, I think, plays a role in affordability. So I don't know if the group or other board members have comments on that, because none of these bullets or the bullets on the next page had anything to do with access.
Well, so Chris, just real quick, again, as we set up the data, we do have some demographic information that we'll be able to apply into the material packets. We don't want to focus too much on access for every single drug until we get down to the subset list. Once we identify the subset list, those are the drugs that the board will be working with. Staff has a much better ability to get that information from there. So it might be a better question served under when we start reviewing the Rule 20 to make sure that we're.
Oh, okay. I must have misunderstood the next slide then. I thought it was sort of our definition of what we're thinking of as accessibility or affordability challenges or affordability. So.
And then John, I see your hand up.
Yeah, and I guess I would just echo that saying, you know, that's my big sticking point with medications of whether if we can afford them, but we can't access them, we don't do much good. So I always will interject access to this conversation, well, I just will always do that. So sorry about that.
Yeah, Rob.
And just to put a pin in what everyone has said, and I think totally appropriate that we could add access here, but specific to kind of support Courtney's point in our enabling legislation, access is of course mentioned. And to put a pin in what she said about that's information that will be gleaned through the 20 rule, if you will, in the information yielded through the data call, and that is the impact on patient access to the drug, considering standard prescription drug benefit designs in health insurance plans offered in the state. So not anything we've lost sight of, but to that point, that's information that we will glean and be able to see daylight through the 20 rule in the actual affordability determinations and reviews.
Great point, Ralph. And that also, we collect a lot of that information also through the data call. We'll be able to get more information from the data call information. So thank you, board, for your time to do the high review. I'm going to ask Pei to share her screen and start talking through the Rule 10 and presenting the information for the carrier data list. Thank you, Pei. We can see that.
Good. So this is the care data list that was linked to the agenda and should be up on our website. Just to go over some housekeeping, the terms and the sources in the sheet should match the process document that was also published. This one just has the sources linked as well.
Pei, can we ask you to enlarge your screen just a little bit too? Thank you. Yeah, the slider. There you go. Thank you.
And then this is what the sheet with the drugs look like from the carrier data. It should be pretty similar to last year with the therapeutic class and proprietary name, non-proprietary name. And columns D through F were reported by the carrier. So the number of prescriptions, enrollees, and total net of rebate spend is reported directly from the 11 carriers. And then G and H are calculated statistics from these columns. We also included the WAC This year we chose to use the end of year WAC. So it's the end of 2023, and we chose to use the median as the statistic of centrality. And then moving on to the blue columns, which we talked a little bit about. But for each of these drugs are ranked against all of the other drugs that was reported by the carriers on the top 25 for each of these three lists. And they're marked as impacted as a high impact on these lists if they are above top 50 for the rankings among all the drugs. However, if they don't have rankings above 50, for example, like this drug, then we also marked which drugs they were mostly impacted on these lists. So even though these ranks are 53 and 66, this drug was mostly impacted on the greatest increase and most costly list. So that is why some of the drugs have not been marked on the list, but all of these come from the carrier list. And then the green columns are something new for this year. So we added the therapeutic alternatives and the number of therapeutics. And these have been consulted by our contracted clinician. And then these columns also have been added this year, and Courtney explained a little bit about the specialties in the annual increase list. So and according to the statute, if the manufacturers have reported the drugs under these lists, we have also marked them under this column. And we have also marked them if they were on the prior year's review list. So is there any questions about the carrier preliminary list?
All right, hearing none, I'm going to jump in so we can kind of talk through this a little bit more. So Pam, I'm going to have you drive as we kind of shore up some of the review against that Rule 10. So if you can go back, let me pull my list here. So again, Rule 10 has the opportunity to look at drugs, whether it's strictly through the WAC, any FDA requirements. Talk about that. Actually, hey, can you go back to the orphan designation? I need to clarify the orphan designation on W, yeah. So last year, there was an option for both, meaning that the drug was identified as both an orphan and non-orphan designation. After doing some additional research with how the definition under our statute and the definition under the FDA and how they designate orphan drugs, we cannot review under both. If it has a designation and a 7-year exclusivity, the drug cannot be reviewed by the board. So hopefully the board, it's going to kind of drill down some of the higher impact drugs because they have the orphan designation of 7-year exclusivity. So the none listed just means that there's none identified in the FDA list, and unsure if maybe there's any other designation for that drug that would be orphan designated in some other capacity. But according to the FDA, every drug that we reviewed that had a designation and a 7-year exclusivity had to be marked as yes, it had an orphan designation. So there's only 2 options this year, which is yes and unlisted. Since we know that under our statute, we cannot review any drugs associated with rare conditions or orphan designation, the board can start there to filter out any drugs on the list. So I think we have 187 drugs pay. Is that right? 185.
I think around 150 something.
So yeah, okay. So, 158 drugs, and then if you can mark out the yeses and then give me a call, I think then it drops it down like to, yeah, so 95, I believe it is. 95 drugs that are left to review. So if the board decides to do something like that, then you can look at maybe therapeutic alternatives. So if the ones that have the yes, But it depends on how many you would want to on the, numbering. So if the, there's some that have 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, removing any with significant amount of therapeutic alternatives can also help drill down the list some more. The board would need to decide on that number of what the market competition would be. And then I think the other one should probably be a conversation about the carriers and how they reported the drug. So we identified the number of carriers with only 1 or 2 carriers reporting an incident with a drug. We understand that's probably has something to do with their how the drug is placed on their formulary or contract with within any contract that they have. But if it impacts a majority of the carriers, then it's probably a system impact. So these are all options that I would like the board to kind of talk about or to drill down. And again, today is not about making any decisions and determining the subset list for this. This is about the staff showing the board kind of how to utilize the spreadsheet to drill down. Because next month we'll have a more substantial conversation about this, because we also want to talk about the insulin list here in a little bit. So Dr. Hartung, I see your hand up. And you're on mute.
I got to go in a minute, but I just wanted to, you mentioned this orphan designation as being a decision point, but it sounds like it's not really a decision point. We're not allowed to, so it is what it is. But these other items that you've just gone through are things we can consider.
Yes.
Okay.
But thank you for staying on. I know you have to get going, but if you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to reach out to the staff before next meeting. Yeah, Chair Bailey.
And then Courtney kind of to just ask a few more questions. So related to the orphan status, obviously we've already had our proposed policy recommendations for the legislature. That meeting has passed, but is it fair to deduce that if it was a desire of the board at any point this year to be able to look at orphan designation in the future, that would have to be a policy recommendation from the board to the legislators in future legislative sessions? Is that the accurate explanation of the process?
Correct. So just like we put forth a recommendation for a cleanup of our Senate bill, we can also maybe make a recommendation to have something more specific around orphan drugs for the board to review. So
thank you. I just wanted to make sure we outlined to all the board members what that would or may look like in the future if that was the desire of the board. So thank you for answering that.
Is there any other questions so far? Dr. Burns.
Yeah, just I mentioned this when we had our board staff meeting earlier this week, but like for instance, Humira is on there and it's listed as not having an orphan designation, but we had a biosimilar of Humira on there that did have that, which I would really encourage that the board staff goes back and talks to the clinical consultant to make sure that the data that we have here is accurate, because I don't want to get too far down this process where, like, say, perhaps we did pick Humira and then later we found out that it did have an orphan designation for at least one indication.
Yeah, we can get that double checked. Yeah, Lori.
I was wondering where on this chart we would see the samples that are given to physicians who provide them at appointments, specialty appointments mostly, to introduce new medicines to patients.
So the top 25 does not information. So we have to understand that the information that we're looking at here is collected through a specific statutory requirement of only identifying the top 25 drugs that impact carriers, whether it's the most costly, most prescribed, and most expensive. Samples are not included in that reporting requirement.
Thanks.
Okay, if you can go towards the end. Oh, I'll get Chris real quick before I go into my next. Yes, Chris.
Is there a, I mean, how did we use guidance last year when making this decision around therapeutic alternatives and the number to consider that there's market competition with a number of therapeutic alternatives? I mean, so if we're trying to pick 5 or 7 or 3, like what did we as a board use as to land on that number, Courtney?
Yeah, if you can go to that column. So again, this is a new column from last year. We did not have this information last year, but because it was kind of challenging at the time for us to understand, because the rule indicates therapeutic alternatives and costs of those, but that's a lot of information to drill down on a preliminary list. So the cost and association of those, the subset list, but it still needed to be met to if that drug has therapeutic alternatives. So this year we decided to do the drop down of yes, no, and then worked with the clinician to indicate how many were there. My understanding, I got my understanding is from education from Portal, who we used to contract with, that the pretty common the exclusive or the market competition comes in after 5 or 6 therapeutic alternatives. So, and I don't think you were on the board yet when they presented that information, Chris. I think they did that, kind of early on when they did some presentations for us and provided that information. So that's kind of where we were going off on that. Yeah, Ralph, I see your hand.
And then Courtney, if I may, just a couple quick things. One, to that point, Chris, there was never any kind of goal or target of how many therapeutic alternatives would be identified. We retain a clinical consultant, a doctorate of pharmacy, who's on faculty at Oregon State University College of Pharmacy, who assist us in identifying those. But if I can also circle back to Lori's previous question about samples. Not something that we would have access to in this particular juncture. And to Courtney's point, we're very prescriptive from directive of statute how this gets done. But to that point, that's a really good call out, because as we engage in the next phases, when we actually conduct affordability reviews, we will be doing requests for information from manufacturers. So that certainly is information that we could solicit at that time, whether they choose to provide that or not, or identify it as trade secret. We could cross that bridge at that time, but certainly an interesting point and a data point that we could solicit from manufacturers once we identify the universe of drugs for actual affordability reviews. Thanks, Courtney.
Yes, sir. Hey, if you can go to the last couple columns, I just wanted to touch those real quick. As the board considers other drill down options. So one of the decisions from the first review was to remove any of the drugs that were being reviewed under the CMS negotiation list. The CMS will be releasing a new list, I believe in March, of the new set of drugs to review. There's no obligation for the board to remove those drugs, knowing that the financial impact really won't be seen until 2027, 2028. And we're reviewing drugs from previous years. So just keeping that in mind, even though we've identified them, that the first review did remove them. If the board decided to remove these ones, that we would also be aware that we might have to remove other 2025, or if the board wanted to just remove the ones from the first review and then just keep whatever drug may show up on the second CMS list that comes out in March. So just wanted to point that out as well. But I definitely encourage the board members to take some time with these spreadsheets, because they're online. Go to the carrots at the top in each of those columns and collect your yes, no's, or filter down following how kind of Rule 10 works, to see what kind of drugs you can come up with, and maybe processes of elimination that will work for discussion for next month. But Chair Bailey, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I did want to ask about the drug also on the CCO list. So I understand the yes, no piece of it. But last year, and I understand last year may not be exactly what we do this year, but where did we land with the CCO list? My understanding was when we got through to do the subset, we kind of blended the two and looked for duplicates and things. Is the CCO list in another location, or do we not have the?
So that's a good question. It's not posted. We can probably apply that information under the into if the drug is identified on the subset list and it was also yes, we can put that information in. But really the carrier list just provides us this pretty much the same information that we get. So the number of claims, number of cost, and the number of enrollees really doesn't give us much more than that. So when we look at the drugs that are on the subset list, that stuff is what is included. And then we do the comparison between what the Medicaid market is and the commercial market is.
Okay, so essentially on the next step, because my recollection from last year was there are some very meaningful differences of drugs on the list.
Yeah. We already
okay.
incorporated those from because that we mimicked that component because it was meaningful. So we already kind of did that in this
Okay, that was the piece I was wanting to ask a clarifying question about. So thank you.
Yes, John.
And my question had to do with that column as well, so it's been answered. Thank you.
Okay. All right, good. Well, if the board doesn't have any other questions referring to the carrier list, I'm happy to show or talk through the insulin list. All right, hearing none, Peyton, go ahead and stop sharing, and then we'll have Heather come and talk about the insulin list.
Find that pesky mute button. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Please let me know if I need to make it any larger. I tried to enlarge ahead of time. So this is basically the spreadsheet that, again, to reiterate, is posted online. So you can find this there. It opens with a spreadsheet with clickable links to navigate throughout the spreadsheet that you're seeing here. We've included a document history, which basically outlines versioning of the document, any notes that are applicable to any of the data contained within the workbook, as well as any definitions that are potentially needed as you review this spreadsheet. Additionally, we also have a tab for the sources used to pull this information together, including APAC, CMS, FDA, Medispan, contracted clinician, and the National Institute of Health. Those are rather informational, and then we go to the NDC information. This is strictly an informational tab. So when you look through this, it is, think of it as like not a dictionary, but basically a reference list for all things NDC that are involved in this list. So you'll find the NDC, you'll find the proprietary name, you'll find the non-proprietary name. In the notes, there's a note about this as well as in the process document that indicates that this asterisk is a combined naming convention or is a summarized naming convention for the non-proprietary naming based on the differences in naming conventions throughout the different sources. Same thing with the manufacturer. As you move through this spreadsheet, you'll find the insulin subclass listed for each NDC, brand or generic, whether or not this is also indicated on the CMS IRA list, therapeutic class as indicated through Medispan, biosimilars that we may have, and a presence of a therapeutic alternative. Orphan designation, we discussed that with the other preliminary list, so I won't go into any great detail there. Route of administration for a particular drug listed by NDC, FDA application, FDI priority review, start date. And when we get to the end over here, you will see that there is WAC information for each NDC, beginning of the year WAC and end of year and the change in the year. Also, you'll see it for unit and package price. At the end, you'll see average percent change, or sorry, there's a percent change in WAC here, and then you'll see percent change over 7 years. How many WAC changes occurred over 7 years and whether or not there is currently, as of 11 or November 2024, if there was a known WAC change for that NDC in 2024. So each of the next 4 tabs is basically looking at the data from APAC from a particular parameter. This first one is from the NDC level. So when you look at it, you'll see it looks a little bit similar to the previous sheet. However, we've pulled in the NDC, the proprietary name, non-proprietary, and insulin subclass. And then you'll see that the number of therapeutic alternatives is included along with the WAC prices that you'll see here. From columns L through, sorry, I went a little too far there, through column T, this is information that was pulled directly from WAC based on the claim data that was found within there. You'll see overall spend, total patient paid, and total payer paid. And then you'll also see the paid per patient for prescriptions, also per patient and per payer. You'll also notice columns L and M are unique patients and total prescriptions filled. This is probably the most indicative tab in the spreadsheet, but I will walk through the others. But before I do, are there any questions so far in what you're seeing at this point? We'll bring this back over here. Okay, seeing none, I'll move on to the next parameter. So each of these, like I was saying, is just a different way to view that claim data. This one is from the perspective of a proprietary name. You'll notice there are no NDCs present. It's not part of this parameter, but you will see each proprietary name in the subclass. And then again, those same columns that you witnessed on the NDC data tab, which is for these different variables that you see here. When you navigate through this, you can feel free to filter, sorting from largest to smallest, and items of that nature in order to look at it from whichever perspective you choose. Also, there is another one for data by non-proprietary name. Notice this is much shorter. Proprietary name, non-proprietary name list is similar across the different ones and makes it a little bit bigger. Again, you can filter across any of these columns. And the last one is data by insulin subclass. There were 5 insulin subclasses indicated that we worked with our sources to develop. And you can also filter these by whichever you choose in terms of looking at it from subclass. But bringing your attention back to the data by NDC, all of those NDC, proprietary information, proprietary name, non-proprietary name, insulin subclass are all contained within this data by NDC. And again, those other 3 are also just different ways of looking at the same data. So from that point of view, are there any questions about this particular data set that you see or something you would like me to go back to? Okay.
Great, Heather. Thank you.
Thank you.
There are no comments or other things from the board. Did the board want to kind of see any drill out? Because remember in Rule 10, the insulin has more specific parameters to look at and consider in association with the overall spend, per patient spend, and patient out-of-pocket costs, which Heather has highlighted there. The other thing on this list is for consideration for drill down is that there are some branded generics, and reminding the board that last year the board did remove any generics that were on the list and only reviewed brand named. And then we also, the therapeutic alternatives, there's only like up to 4. So if the board wanted to, review only, the one that had like 1 or 3 or however the board decides to look at the therapeutic for possible market competition, that's an option. I think that those are the highlights for this page. But if the board doesn't have any other questions, feedback, or guidance for this stuff, we can also start looking at maybe applying Rule 10 to the carrier list. We just want to make sure that when the board understood the documents of the preliminary list, spend some time again, using those filters, following Rule 10 and start drilling down. But I think we'll try to do that here in a few minutes with at least sampling with the carrier data. But yeah, just want to make sure I'm providing the opportunity before we jump over. Yeah, Chris, I see your hand up.
Courtney, other than the therapeutic alternatives in terms of making a decision, like the board making a decision of how we filter this, could we really clearly call out any other decisions that the board has to make as a group that aren't defined in the rules about how this needs to be filtered?
No, as long as you apply the rules, so that would apply to looking at the overall spend, drilling out anything regarding the therapeutic and determining the brand and generics.
The brand and generic piece. So
Yeah.
we make a decision about whether it's brand or
Yeah,
brand
that is one
and
of
generic.
the requirements under Rule 10. Is whether there are any approved and marketed generics or biosimilars for the drug. So yes, Dr. Burns, is your hand up.
This might just be me, and so we can disregard it. But I mean, I would find it helpful if we had a way, like if you guys had grouped it by the active insulin product. So like insulin Lispro with insulin Lispros, insulin glargines with insulin glargines. And if that's, not something that other people think is important, then that's fine.
Will you just apply the filter real quick for that on that list?
The proprietary name?
Non-proprietary name.
The non-proprietary name just alphabetizes out so that they're all the same. Alphabetize them so that.
Oh.
Thank you. So is that what you're talking about? So we see
Yeah,
groups
kind
together?
of. Yeah. I mean, when you get into it, and I think this is a problem that we ran into when we attempted to do this last year, is like looking at something like insulin glargine. There are a lot of insulin glargines on the market. And just say, picking Lantus, for example, which was the original insulin glargine, doesn't necessarily really give you a great idea of what's happening out there in the world with patients and who's using what and what alternatives there are. I don't know. Insulin is really complicated now. I think when this is my personal opinion, like when the statute went in and the committee was formed, there's been a lot of work on the federal and the state level around insulin, and the market has exploded. So it makes it a lot more complicated to try and pick insulins to review. So I don't know. That's all. You can disregard.
No, I bring up a good point, but that's why in the rule, so we knew that those were going to be challenges, or I recall that the board knew that was going to be a challenge, and that's why the overall spend is considered one of the key data points, and then what that spend is per patient, and then for out-of-pocket cost. So there are filtration ways to like look at those in those groups and then kind of narrow down, based off of the Rule 10 parameter. I know right now it kind of looks really overwhelming because there's a lot of insulin products, and we haven't really done any of the filtrations to kind of narrow it down. But I've done the sampling, and Heather's done the sampling, and we both come up with a handful that once the rule is applied to it, you can drill down and you'll get a pretty good list.
Totally fair. And I would like to say that that you and Heather and Pei have done a really great job. Like the data looks beautiful. So good work.
Thank you.
It's up to Heather and Pei. I just yeah, Ralph, I see your hand.
So first, if I can echo what Dr. Burns just said to all of you, this is great work. But to Dr. Burns, I'd say, and maybe we contemplate this as a conversation as we dive into this, and I think it was something that Dr. Hartung had flagged for us last time around, but given the statutory requirement is to identify at least one insulin product, I think it would be a great conversation for the board to have and come to its own device and conclusion if the board wants to set out and say we are going to identify one long acting, one rapid acting, etc. So I would put that out to you to contemplate, and certainly something we can come back and circle on. So thank you.
And Ralph, you just triggered my memory that I do believe that was one of the conversations of the original discussion for the insulin identification for last time. So we can look at maybe breaking those subclasses out within with their NDCs to make it a little more digestible for the board to review per each of those subset classes. Alrighty. So did the board want to try to do a mock through on the insulin or the carrier data, or we're kind of at the end of providing you as much information as possible. We can start applying Rule 10 in some way, have some discussions. Not sure what the board's preferences is, whether it's the insulin or the carrier data to start with.
I mean, Courtney, I can say that based on our experience in previous years, you know, it took us a lot of time, obviously related to the carrier data. So I would like to invest the next 55 minutes that we have here in this meeting to at least start talking about the carrier data related to not just specifically insulin, but all the medications. It seems like this is going to be important discussion for multiple times to get to our subset list. So I'd at least like to see us start mocking through at least some of the filters that we together want to talk about.
Sounds fair. Well, then I'm
Shelley, if I can, sorry, Courtney, if I can just do a check. I want to do a time check with folks. I believe Dr. Burns has a hard stop coming up. Quorum will be 5. So I just want to confirm that Chris, Lori, Dan Kennedy, and John Murray will be able to stay with us for the duration.
and there's no votes, so
Yeah, yeah. My intention was never that we would vote too. Thank you for asking, Ralph.
Sure.
I will be here, yes.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you all.
I'm good,
Yes.
Ralph.
Great.
This is Board Member Kennedy. I will be in attendance as well.
good. Hey, will you pull up the document I'm going to have you drive? And share that. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah. Sorry, which one exactly?
Their carrier data call?
Yeah.
I mean, sorry, not the data call, the carrier preliminary sheet. Thank you. Alrighty, so going through, we know that the board cannot review orphan drugs. So does the board want to start with just removing all the yeses of any drug that has an orphan designation? All right, we'll start there. I think she's already has that applied. Perfect. Thank you, Pei. Another option to start off with, and again, it could be either looking at therapeutic alternatives or looking at the brand or generic classing. So I think the board should have a discussion if they want to review or just filter. Hey, would you do for just generic drugs just to see what ones those are?
Sorry, filter out generics.
No, I want you to filter in generics. Thanks. So generics include proprietary names. Again, board members, you're probably more familiar with some of these. We have to scroll through those. How many generics are there altogether, Peg?
25.
Okay. Do any board members have concerns with any of these that they see as far as removing them? Yeah, Chair Bailey, I see your hands up.
One thought I had was that we might want to focus on filtering by the number of carriers first, just so that we can see if something is really impacting across the whole ecosystem, and then maybe apply generic second. I don't know. That's just one brand.
part of the process. There's multiple scenarios that you can apply the filtration for, but we're happy to do that. So go ahead and add back in, pay the brown. And then go to your carriers and so I think it's remove
Largest to smallest, maybe, and
yeah, you can do that. There you go. Yeah, so and we did collect off of 11 carriers, so all these are considered 100% impact in some way. Majority of them having. Oh, the other thing the board can filter out is the list type. So if it's just specifically most prescribed, you can kick that out, knowing that most of the most prescribed are, you know, lower price drugs. Yeah, Chris, I see your hand up.
Did we take vaccines out last year, Courtney?
We did not take vaccines out. And again, just as a reminder that in some capacity, the vaccine, if it's not under the most prescribed independently, it may have shown some sort of impact to the system or patient out-of-pocket cost. So it's a board decision on how they want to look at vaccines. But as you can see, in some capacity, there's a few of them that indicate greatest increase and most costly to the health insurance company in some capacity. And you can always look at how many patients receive that to the cost and those kind of things. So I guess my question to the board, or sorry, Dr. Burns, I'll go ahead and speak and then I'll ask my question to the board.
Oh, I was just going to make a suggestion that perhaps when we get into the filtering, that we filter out drugs that have a generic.
Okay.
So that we're looking primarily at branded agents.
Yeah, that again, what the board decided on last time as well. And Chair Bailey.
well, and I guess to lean into that, since I know we're just kind of mocking our way through some of our first, rounds of this, it would seem to me kind of in alignment with what Vice Chair Dr. Burns is saying, that we would want to then also filter by most expensive, because that'll get us it'll at least lower some of the others, because that's on a per claim basis, right?
Yeah. So do you want us to, we can play those filters, because again, we're not.
Yeah, I think every filter someone has a suggestion for, we start looking at.
I'll get to you in just a second. John is going to ask Pay to remove generics off of the list, and then filter off of most costly.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you want to do the ranking. I think you want to do the actual, yeah. Oh, so we don't want to pull all those out. So go ahead and cancel out of that one, Pay. And just go to your filter for MC and then filter largest. Okay. And John, go ahead.
Oh, it's back on generics. I don't see too many generics being a cost impediment to patients or plans, and I would remove the generics off there. I mean, there may be an occasional one, but by and large, it's not one that a group that impacts costs, in my opinion.
Yeah. And that's completely reasonable. Dr. Burns, I see your hand up again.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know if I was clear though. What I was saying is that we also remove branded agents that have a generic on market, so that we're looking strictly at branded agents. So, I mean, we ran into this as a conversation point the last time we did this. If we pick something that already has a generic on market, there's already an alternative out there that in theory, even if it's not lower cost right now, the longer it's on market and the more competition, in theory that comes, the lower the cost will be. So that would be my suggestion.
how do you think that that would impact a review from a prior year to determine affordability overall versus the projection of removing?
Right. Well, I guess one of the things that I would point out is that on this list, and you could look at, say, something like Advair or Vyvanse, they're on here as a branded agent and a generic. And something like Advair or Brio has a number of generic agents available for it. They're on here as well. So, I mean, at least to me, in my mind, that it's I wouldn't pick something like Advair because there's, even if it is costly, there's readily available not just therapeutic equivalents but actual generic agents available for it. So whereas I don't want to pick on anything, but some of these other medications on here don't have and won't have a generic for a while.
And so even if the the alternative to like Advair also showed greatest increase or most costly to the healthcare system, you'd still want those removed off, even though you could be losing a possible drug to review for affordability?
Well, but we wouldn't, I mean, we've already kind of had a consensus where the majority of us said that we would remove the generics. So we would really just be looking at one of those agents, which is the original branded agent. And that might not necessarily have, tremendous market share. And there would be a lower cost alternative in the generic that's available.
Even though right now we have everything drilled down by the brand name.
Right. But so like, again, for example, Advair, which is on there, has generic alternatives, which we've filtered out, but we would keep Advair. To me, I don't know. And again, if the board doesn't agree, that's fine. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me.
All right, Chair Bailey, if your hand's up. Ben.
I agree with Vice Chair Dr. Burns. I think this gets to, and again, she highlighted, we discussed this last year too, but we want to look at the data from the year in which we're able to look at the data, but we also do, I think most of us, do want to do meaningful work. And so I think it's almost the same sentiment as drugs, at least the way I would relate it, as drugs on the IRA list, right? It's kind of the same philosophy from my perspective. Drugs on the IRA list do have visibility, and there's federal solutions or visibility on some of the challenges. I think to me, it seems like a similar perspective that I know we're looking at previous year's data, but to the extent that we have a sufficient number of other medications to look at, if a drug already has a generic on the market, I kind of just personally look at it as the same thing as the IRA. If it's drugs already on the IRA list, from my perspective, we could focus on other things. Again, that's only my perspective, but I share the same perspective as Vice Chair Dr. Burns referenced related to drugs that are on this list that already have a generic on the market. Because from my perspective, that's a plan design thing that doesn't necessarily correlate with the bigger affordability issue, but that's just my personal opinion.
And I would share that same thought. I was going to second Vice Chair Burns's thoughts on that. Generics should drive down the cost within the market. There's always that happening in a pharmacy though, where brand names stay on formularies because of rebates and rebates back to the plan or to someone to keep it on the formulary, which is frustrating for a pharmacy, I'll just say. But anyway, I would say that generics generally should reduce the cost of medications. And I think singling out the brand name, I don't want to do that, I don't think.
Yeah, and I appreciate the conversation, and I'm just trying to point out, that although a drug may have a generic, sometimes you don't see that cost savings until there's a multiple generics available. And so make sure that we're having the conversation from all points. But this is your list as a board member to drill out and to work through. So, but Chair Lee, you had said something about the CMS list. So pay, do you want to drill out on that filter? Just again, as a mock example. It was on, yes, thank you. And then I think the other one that I was going to suggest is back on the other side. To filter out independently identified most prescribed. If the board wanted, again at that, so filter out, yeah, on that list. It's already there. Okay, it's already nice.
Hey, if I could also ask you to sort, and I believe it was column J, highest to lowest on WAC increases as well. Would love to see that. Thank you.
Alrighty. How many drugs is on that right now? Okay.
31.
31.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else that the board wanted to look at? So I know that Chair Bailey had asked something about the number of carriers. Hey, is there any with carriers that are only like one or two? No, okay, so all those fell off too. Can you pull for just 3 carriers to see what those drugs are?
And Courtney, while Pay is doing that, I just want to make the obvious statement that there are no decisions being made today. This is a work session. This is the collective intellectual horsepower, if you will, and knowledge of all of you coming together to help inform and help staff prepare for future discussions with you. So again, thanks for this. This is a great exercise.
Yeah, so again, applying the filters that you already have, seeing that, only 3 carriers being impacted by this anti-asthmatic, that's one drug. So you can take back to the original filtration of that. Again, this is samples as the board starts thinking about the removal of how to drill down to a meaningful subset list. You can use number of carriers, anything within how they're reported. And yeah, Chair Bailey, I see your hand up.
One of my, what I believe to be an accurate recollection, hopefully so. Last year when we were talking about number of carriers, like I feel like when we were sorting them, I think we kind of like went down to 9. Like when we had enough drugs on our list that we were looking at, that something back in my brain tells me that we kind of looked at things kind of from 11 to 9. I could be wrong, but that was a data point that jumped out at me.
So yes, but last year we only collected information from 9 carriers. So
that's why the 9 came up for me. So okay, avoid that comment then, please. Thank you.
It was like if it impacted 50 or more carriers.
Got it. Of the 9. Okay.
And we reviewed those. That was one of the filtrations. So anything kind of below that, only a handful. Like I was just showing you with the 3, 1 drug was impacted. So maybe meaningful just as you filter down to look at how many drugs are impacted by a certain group of carriers that reported on it. Let's see, I was trying to think of other filtration options. Therapeutic alternatives. Let's see what that would be. So here again, therapeutic alternatives. You have a handful of them. Actually, Pay would be the number of how many that you'd want to filter on. Thanks. So again, if we kind of look at removing maybe 7, I think it's like 7, 10, 8. Yeah, so removing those just to see what.
Courtney, if I could seek input from board members and likely our pharmacist, whether we should actually be going in the other direction because fewer generics available might make access to those hard. So I would really love to get input from our clinicians, whether they think we should be filtering with a higher number of them or lower, both in the context of cost and the access issues that Chris surfaced earlier. Dr. Burns.
Yeah, so just to be clear though, a therapeutic alternative isn't necessarily a generic, right? It
Right,
just
right.
means that there's another medication that could treat the same indication, and so not quite the same thing. I would agree, like if there are more, then there's a lot more opportunity for access to treatment for patients, which is good. So I would concur with that. I just wanted to make sure there was a clarification.
Sure. Appreciate. Would you have a thought on which boxes to check there or what a cut line might be for this exercise?
I mean, I don't know that I would necessarily really filter it there. What I was trying to get at earlier was trying to filter out if they had a generic, so like a proprietary generic, was what I was trying to get at. I'm not. It's challenging. This is a challenge, right? Because like if you look at something like say Dupixent, like there are a number of different things that you can use Dupixent for. So you may have a number of alternatives for asthma and different alternatives for, say dermatitis. So I don't know that I personally would really touch that. I was looking for the generics.
Okay, appreciate that. Thanks.
We didn't put in the generic equivalents. That might be something we have to either try and do. It'll be challenging to do. At this point, we can work on it or absolutely incorporate it in the next review or iteration as we go forward to include those for the drill down for specific generic numbering. But as far as for what we have here, knowing that therapeutic alternatives is one of the rule drill downs, would it be accurate to say that, so if we remove like 9, 8, and 7 to at least look at the list, because we understand there's drugs out there that can treat just the similarities that those drugs already have that many on them?
I mean, again, from my perspective, I don't know that I would necessarily adjust that. If I had to make an adjustment for column Y, I might change that to drug has a generic or biosimilar and leave Z as drug has therapeutic alternatives. And then if Y was a yes, then I would filter by that. That was really my thought process. I don't know personally that I would vote, like I feel comfortable removing medications because there's a number here in column Z.
Okay, so go ahead and clear that off. So going off what you just said, Dr. Burns, so if you go to column Y, it says none listed in yes. So if it's a yes for biosimilars or equivalents, remove those that do have them.
Right, but see, column Y says, does it have a therapeutic equivalent or a biosimilar? A therapeutic equivalent and a generic aren't necessarily the same things, but you could lump generic and biosimilar together, and then you're getting to the same, you're getting to the same concept of something that was a proprietary, unique drug that has essentially lost patent, right? And now there are generics made with that same proprietary, like the same active ingredient. That's what we're getting at. A therapeutic equivalent can have a completely different active ingredient, but have like the same indication or the same mechanism of action, right? So it's a little bit of, it's a different concept.
Yep. Courtney and data team research team, let's go back to the shop and see what we can do in terms of working with our clinical contractor to identify and potentially resort that and see how big of a lift that will be.
Okay. Yeah, Shelley.
Well, I think for clarity, just to confirm, if you're doing that process and seeing what we can identify, if I'm hearing you right, Vice Chair Dr. Burns, we could leave Y as it is, but essentially add one more column that more specifically says drug has generic equivalent or biosimilar. Is that the that's exactly, then would that be what you're looking for?
Yeah, so maybe I could give you an example, and I think this is one that will resonate with most of the folks on the committee. If you look at line 47, Vyvanse, and you go across and it says drug has a therapeutic equivalent or biosimilar, and it says none listed. And then you go to drug has a therapeutic alternative, and it says yes, right? Am I reading this correctly across? Yeah. Okay. But Vyvanse does have a generic and is in fact on this list. Like before we filtered out the generics, it was on here. So that's what it's saying here essentially is not Y and Z are giving us contradictory information. Y, I think, is saying unlisted because it's looking at it from a biosimilar and not a generic, right? Whereas there is a generic on market, again, because it's on this list. So I guess that's, yeah, what I'm trying to get at is I think you could make an adjustment with Y, because Y, the information in column Z and then column AA is already on the spreadsheet. You've done a really great job here. And so I think if you adjusted Y to say, does it have a generic or a biosimilar, we would be getting at the concept that I'm trying to articulate and not doing a great job at. This, is there something on market that has the same active medication in it?
Yeah, I understand what you're getting at, Dr. Burns. I would agree.
I gotta go though. I'm really sorry.
No, we totally appreciate this input, Dr. Burns. And to that point, I just want to go back with staff and again, our clinical person to confirm that the way this information was pulled, that we're not conflating, that if we conflated therapeutic equivalent and generic, I want us to be able to go line by line to make sure that we are capturing this correctly to get to the points that you're making. So good feedback. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah,
Bye.
Z and AA could stay the same, right? It's just that Y we would want to relook at and just change the word therapeutic equivalent to drug has generic or biosimilar.
I'm taking some notes here for that. All right. So that's some really great feedback. I guess this is why we're kind of talking with the board members. So we can clean up some of this stuff. Is there anything else that the board's seen or would like to have a discussion about associated with this list?
Could you just remind me, Courtney, what about the discussion about Shingrix that we had last year? Because I know we had a lot of board discussion because Shingrix was on the list. We were talking about doing the review. We got a lot of feedback from stakeholders, et cetera, around vaccine availability, et cetera. So was it just specifically, did we decide that we weren't going to look at Shingrix specifically, or was it, obviously it wasn't vaccines in general? I tried to look back at the minutes and I see that we made a decision not to move forward with Shingrix, but I don't remember about vaccines in general.
Yeah, so it's a great question, Chris. And you're right that the decision was that Shingrix did seem to have an affordability component, so that's why the board didn't move it forward. But it doesn't remove vaccines altogether from looking. There was no decision that looking at vaccines altogether. It just, because again, in some capacity or another, especially if a vaccine shows up across 9, 10, or 11 carriers reporting them as most costly and greatest increase, there's a system impact there, right? And even though, so that's, again, the lens is to look at drugs that may cause affordability problems, and that includes vaccines or other drugs, even if they get large discounts or programs and stuff like that. Our requirement is to look at the drugs from this list. The list will tell you where the impacts are. Jelly, yeah, I see your hand.
When I think specifically, Dr. Lehman, my recollection is that although it was on the master subset list, as we drilled down, it was the patient copay piece that what we leaned into making our decision to remove it was that that didn't have the type of patient out-of-pocket expense. Not that that's our guiding. I mean, obviously, every drug will be viewed at, you know, on its own and things, but that was my recollection of the why related to Shingrix.
Okay, thank you.
But yeah, there's actually more vaccines on this list than there were last year. Just so you know. Any other questions or feedback? I think we have a really great thing to look at regarding what Vice Chair Bailey was saying. So as we're trying to revamp anything, if board members have any other suggestions to include or exclude, this is a great opportunity. Yeah, Chair Bailey.
Thank you. I think, and one thing to help us, you know, for our next meeting would be, and this is just I guess, a request of my colleagues, is we may each want to come kind of play around on our own with some of the filters. Obviously, we're going to listen and learn to our colleagues, and that might change how we filter things, but that we each kind of filter some of the information on our own based on our knowledge and, you know, come to the meeting with some ideas of how we might personally filter things so that when we have our next discussion, you know, we each have kind of some prepared thoughts related to that order that can help guide us each through our discussions. But I guess if we don't have anything, I think we're gonna, especially with Vice Chair Dr. Burns having to leave the meeting, I don't think we're gonna dive into the insulin template right now too much. So unless anyone else has any discussion they would like to do related to the carrier information, I would like to, I guess I'll ask Ralph before this, are there any updates, Ralph, before I proceed with my own announcement of the next meeting time?
No, there are not. Thank you, Chair Bailey.
Absolutely. Well,
sorry
go
to
ahead.
interrupt.
Sorry, Courtney.
As I'm looking at this, I actually do have a question for the board. And hey, I'm going to still screen for you because I think this is important, like what Chair Bailey was saying. So, and I haven't filtered out all, I just want to make sure that the instructions are clear for staff as we go forward with how to kind of clean up or crosswalk where the generic and brands are. So again, we kind of ran into this last year between Inflectra and Renoflex. They have this similar non-proprietary name, so the base drug. And then looking at, so they're identified both as brand, even though they have the same non-proprietary. I'm trying to find what she was saying regarding the Vyvanse one. Apologies, let me scroll through here for a second.
And Courtney, even the Advair that she identified earlier in the discussion, I also saw the generic albuterol or generic Advair on the list somewhere too.
Yeah.
Courtney, if you filtered it by proprietary name, like alphabetically, you could find that Vyvanse, and then you could go to the generic name real quick, or non-proprietary name, I guess, and you'll see the one sheet that Dr. Burns was talking about.
Yeah, let me go through real quick to Liz. Okay. All right, so here we have these two. So yeah, it did kick out. So again, we and then I will go in and update to say that it does. Okay. I see.
Yeah, that's what her question was, like, that's a generic, so how is that not a therapeutic equivalent?
Yeah, okay.
And again, I think her intention was just to make sure that column, at least my understanding of her intention, which I do agree with, is that column Y leans much more into a true generic or biosimilar, but that we use therapeutic equivalent has been addressed in Z and AA. Because those could be totally different agents that could be therapeutic equivalents. So I think her point was just leaning into making sure it's the same agent when we list drug therapeutic equivalent or biosimilar, or drug generic and biosimilar.
Yeah. All right, we'll clean that up. Figure out what the best column processes for that and then bring it back. Now if I have any questions, I'll reach out to board members for any additional guidance, but thank you, Chris, for clarifying that. Yeah, Chris.
I had one more question, Chair Bailey, if it's okay.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It has to do with I mean, before we end the meeting, it's not related to the data that we've been reviewing, but I've been trying to think of a way that we could get more data on 340B meds throughout the state, because we've gotten so much feedback from the FQHCs and the Ryan White, organizations that are providing these critical services who rely on that 340B money. And I don't know, and it's I mean, proprietary information, but if there's a way for pharma companies to, and I don't know if this, I'm thinking out loud, Chair Bailey, but like share purchase data not in terms of revenue or total spend, et cetera, but like by volume of some of the meds that these FQHCs, et cetera, are purchasing. So it could give us a picture that we could somehow put into the spreadsheet that shows like, hey, FQHCs are buying, 10,000 units of this. That would not exactly explain how much money that is for each of the FQHCs throughout the state, but at least let us have a picture of, man, that's going to be a huge impact on all the FQHCs or the, HIV programs throughout the state if to help inform the decision and the discussion, and would be interested to hear other board members' thoughts on that.
Well, I'll say, Dr. Lehman, while I don't disagree with you with the intention of looking at it, one of my, at least the way I understand it, and I'm sure we'll get correction if I'm inaccurate, is that manufacturer's visibility often stops at the wholesaler level. So so that's one challenge, right? Is I'm assuming manufacturers add the discount on 340B somehow in their net of rebate. I mean, I guess I'm just assuming they're adding those types of discounts. I, again, don't want to speak for any manufacturer, and I'm sure we'll get great clarification related to that. But I think some of that ends up with maybe next year's data call and others where, and I know, each pharmacy does things differently, but there is an opportunity when pharmacies adjudicate transactions to flag fields with the E1 basis of cost determination field that you can identify that as AWP or UNC or 340B. Sorry, I see Ralph's adding his hand. So those are discussion points that I think for future, so anyways, Ralph, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Bailey. Chris, it's a fascinating point, to the point of what we could solicit from manufacturers, certainly something we could explore. I actually think that it could be an interesting opportunity and collaboration for us to go in both directions and to reach out to the Primary Care Association, which I am certainly happy to do. I've had very healthy conversations with their government relations person and see what they would be able or willing to share on an individual drug level that was aggregated, de-identified, that did not put any of those entities in jeopardy with RISA or any other part of the supply chain that they rely on to ensure those drugs are available. So great call out, and happy to start to facilitate a conversation with the Primary Care Association folks. And Marty Carty, if you are out there listening, I will be reaching out to you soon. So thank you.
Yeah, I definitely don't want to put it on the pharmacies because like the contract pharmacies definitely don't know at the time of adjudication that those are going to be eligible claims. So I don't think we're checking boxes or knowing at the time of submission. I was getting more toward like, I mean, the pharma companies know what I'm buying on GPO and what I'm buying on 340B. I mean, I get a report. They know throughout the state all those FQHCs that are purchasing meds at 340B. So I don't know. I'm sure you're much smarter than me with that, Ralph, to be able to figure that out. But it shouldn't be on the retail pharmacies is what I'm getting at.
We certainly can explore all of that.
For me, Ralph, the information that would be helpful would be to know whether the drug is currently covered on a 340B contract. What I see as a 340B contracted pharmacy is that it's tremendously beneficial to the FQHC. for that drug to be covered. And that list changes always, or often, not always, often. And it generally goes down on the number of drugs that are on the 340B contracted list, which is really hard on FQHCs. But just for me as a pharmacist or a person on this board to know that it's on FQHC or a 340B reimbursed contract list, and we wouldn't be getting into cost numbers. We wouldn't be getting into anything like that that might risk information we shouldn't know or can't know. The benefit to the FQHC is tremendous. So just me knowing that it's on the 340B list is sometimes probably going to be enough.
So what I think I'd like to do is catch both you and Dr. Lehman offline and individually stating that out loud to capture and have a conversation about what those specific data points would be so that I can learn from you all as well and convey that appropriately and accurately in some of those requests. Wonderful. Thank you. Back, Chair Bailey. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, and I guess one other data source, and Dr. Lehman, I don't disagree with you. I just know sometimes pharmacies know, sometimes they could flag, but related to sources of info, also 340B administrators could be a source of info as long as we had consent with data sharing, right? With as well as I thought there used to be a state clearinghouse that was ran under Roger Citron's group that some people reported some of the 340B transactions through. That was my understanding, but that goes back like 10 years. So just kind of throwing it out there that at some point there had been a request to submit that the administrators submitted it, not the pharmacies. That was my recollection from.
Okay. Chair Bailey, if so, your memory is admittedly far better than mine, but certainly something I will happily follow up on. Thank you.
Yeah, and we can definitely talk with Ralph about that because, you know, being a part of an organization that's a covered entity, I can talk to Ralph about where we are submitting data and all of that stuff.
Courtney.
Thank you. So just, Chris, I think that's a great point to kind of consider. Would it be the expectation to have that in the preliminary list, or is it better suited for drugs under the subset?
Yeah, I think as long as we get it at some point before we're making decisions, so like with that we have the information and know the impact on the FQHCs, I don't think it needs to be on the preliminary list necessarily, Courtney.
And in fact, to that point, Courtney, sorry, that is that's in the 20 rule as we refer to it. So that is the logical, appropriate place, and this would give us time and runway to explore the viability of that. So.
And then just to follow up, Chris, with what you're saying is that it is our intention to send out a request for information to those that would have that information during the subset list. So I think it's a great point you bring it up, and we'll flag that. And just ensuring that to do it in the preliminary list component of it would be really challenging, versus once we identify the subset list, then we can that's the drugs that we want to look at. So again, we have the preliminary, we remove all the drugs that do not fall under Rule 10 requirements. And then from there is where we start requesting the information, whether it's through the data call, contacting manufacturers, you know, other stakeholders and those kind of things. So that's what the intended process is. Awesome. Well, thank you, board. I appreciate it. Chair Bailey, if there's nothing else, meeting's back to you.
Okay, well, thank you. I will say then our next board meeting is Wednesday, February 19th, 2025. Again, keep in mind those meetings are now at 9 a.m. Pacific. But with there being no further business before the board, all in favor of adjourning, please say yes.
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 Any opposed, please say no. Okay, meeting is adjourned. See you next month on February 19th. Thank you.